Kansas State finally lands their first player in the portal, and it's the exact type of player that they need.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh. You can find me on Twitter at Christian S. Rauh. And thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Well, it finally happened. We finally got some traction. We finally got some action in the transfer portal for Kansas State in the good way, right? We saw plenty of players head out and start their path for a new team, but we did not get anyone coming into Manhattan, and that all changed on Thursday. Jayden Rowe commits to Kansas State. The redshirt sophomore who entered the college football transfer portal from Oklahoma is now a Wildcat. So still 14-1. Who's counting? There's 14 players from Kansas State who have left for the portal, and now one new player coming in, committed, and heading over to be with Kansas State. This is perfect. This is fantastic. This is exactly what this team needs right off the bat. We mentioned it in the last time we talked about football on, I believe, Wednesday it was, and the priority shifted. It had to shift to cornerback. It absolutely had to after Jacob Parrish declaring for the NFL draft, after seeing, just plenty other just depth pieces leaving in the transfer portal, and of course, seeing Keenan Garber also graduating. There was just a huge need very quickly for defensive back, especially at the cornerback position. And adding a guy like Jayden Rowe is exactly the right piece you need to start your path to getting the secondary back to where it needs to be in 2025. This cannot be the only piece in the secondary and really in the cornerback position that they add in this transfer portal. I stated that they need at least two cornerbacks in this transfer portal window. I think that needle hasn't moved yet. I think that you might still need to add two more, but we need at least one more cornerback after Jayden Rowe. Let's take a look at what he has done so far in college. Not too much so far. A lot of things we're dealing with injuries for the former Sooner. He did play some special teams for Oklahoma, but other than that, his playing time was pretty limited. He was hurt over those last two seasons that I mentioned, and he just played in 4 games for the Sooners, and most of that time was with the special teams. However, he did come out of college, a highly recruited college kid, a former 4-star, according to multiple industries of ESPN, 24/7, and On3 when he was coming into college football in the class of 2022. He's from Tulsa Union High School. He was a track athlete. It's a fast kid. He's got very good reflexes and awareness, and that's what we've seen in his high school tape. And when he did play on the special teams, he did make some impacts in those 4 games before he either had the red shirt or was injured on the season. A lot of potential, a lot of really good things to look forward to from this kid. But obviously there's some risk. And if you look at some of the transfers that they've had over the past couple seasons on the defensive side, especially now, mostly it's with the linebackers, but I guess you could make that, the argument with just the defense as a whole. Some of these transfers haven't panned out. And when you look at a guy that has been injured his entire college career so far, it's hard not to have a little bit of, concerns heading into the season with that first commitment. But if this is not the only position group or the only player in this position group added, this is a perfect piece for him to slowly build up, work on being a depth piece for Kansas State. He has special teams experience at the Big 12 level because he played with Oklahoma last season as well. So he's used to this conference. You got to love that as well. And you're talking about a guy that not only are you getting him for just 1 year, he has 2 years of eligibility left. And with his injuries over the past couple seasons, he might get 3 if he can get some kind of medical hardship waiver. And those have seemed to be pretty liberal over the last couple seasons. They've been pretty good with those, especially with players in the COVID years. We're seeing certain players, some quarterbacks from Utah playing 8 years, right? I think the quarterback for Utah went to high school the same year as Trevor Lawrence, the quarterback for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And Trevor Lawrence has been in the league for multiple years. And in Cam Rising, that's his name, he's going to be trying to get another year back at Utah. Insane, right? However, he has a chance to potentially play 3 seasons with Kansas State. It's exactly what you need. And maybe, who knows, maybe this is a guy that can build up to be from once a 4-star recruit that he was with Tulsa Union High School, and maybe turn into another Jacob Parrish, maybe turn into a guy that turns into NFL draft potential, or on the worst case scenario, he's a depth piece for this secondary and something that you absolutely still need on this defense, because they're hurting when it comes to that right now, and they need all those pieces that they can help. And it's kind of almost like adding another freshman with a tad bit of college experience. He's sat in the rooms, at least. He's sat in the coaching. He's seen the experience around him. And yes, he's played in some games. But for the most part, because of his injuries, it's almost like having an extra piece to that new recruiting class coming in from 2025. So something just to keep in mind, that he's probably going to work in with those type of players, probably has a little bit of an advantage because of just knowing the processes a little bit more. But just based on the type of play and type of resume that we've seen from him while he was at Oklahoma, I don't think you can step and say right off the bat, this guy is going to be a cornerback 1 or anything by chance like that. Let's try to be realistic on that case. However, it's exciting that they're pushing their focus to cornerback, making sure their first commitment, or at least going out and trying to get commitments to cornerback, because it's exactly where they got to go. And I still think that needle hasn't changed. I still think the priority remains number 1 cornerback, even though they've already got one on the board. And that still continues with some of those players. And we're going to talk about that in the second segment as we get on moving forward to Locked On Kansas State here. But there's some quarterbacks coming in this weekend to Manhattan. So we're going to definitely dig into them, and hopefully we can see some more before the Christmas time period, and maybe have an actual depth chart to look at, or a potential depth chart for this secondary. Jayden Rowe is just going to be the first of hopefully many in the transfer portal. I predicted 8. That was the number that I projected when we were getting into the portal, when we were beginning, because of that new roster 105 size. However, I didn't expect 14 players from Kansas State to leave in the portal, and there might be 1 or 2 still kind of on the edge. So I would just probably go on a prediction, say we maybe get 1 more hit the portal. So I'm guessing maybe 15 total leave for Kansas State. In my mind, that's going to push me up back towards that 10 level. I think we're going to end up with 10 players coming in from the transfer portal overall when we're all done with this before spring ball happens. So I think we still got 9 more on the table. I think out of those 9 more, I'm hoping that at least 2 more are corners, at least 1 at the very least. But give me 3 cornerbacks in this transfer portal window. I don't think anyone is going to be upset about that. Would you? I would not be, if we can get that kind of depth and push forward, and not have to rely on that freshman class so much, at least at the beginning of the season. Let them work, let them cook, let them learn, and figure out what they need to do and where they fit properly across the secondary. Because as Coach Kleiman mentioned in his press conference on National Signing Day, a lot of those defensive backs that he signed can either play safety or corner, meaning that they have room to learn. Are they going to learn both positions, or are they going to stick to a certain position? Adding more depth in the transfer portal from players that already have that college experience gives those freshmen more time to figure out where the best fit is for that player and for our defense. And that is only going to help this program even more in the long run. So I love that. So give me 3. Give me 3 cornerbacks. I think that's exactly what you need. Before we head on to the next segment, as I mentioned, 14 left. We got 1 coming in. One of those 14, offensive lineman Carter Willis, has found a new home after leaving in the transfer portal. He's going to head to Seattle, Washington, with the University of Washington, and be on that offensive line. He's going to the Big Ten. And I can be completely honest with you, I think he's going to be probably easily their starting tackle in 2025. And I would not be shocked if he becomes their best offensive lineman in 2025 as well. When you look at the rest of their line, and things like that. You're talking about a team that was just in the national championship last year. A lot of players left. They got a new coach, obviously, with their coach in the national championship, DeBoer, being the head coach of Alabama now. However, Carter Willis is going to be a Washington Husky. I like that spot for him, to be completely honest, and I'll be rooting on for him, of course. But that spot, heading up into the Big Ten, going to play some really good schools. He has an opportunity to really work on his draft stock, and hopefully that can push him to the next level. So good luck to Carter Willis. But as we continue on here, we have plenty still to talk about. Jayden Rowe is not going to be the only player that commits to Kansas State over the next couple weeks. There's no doubt about that. And we might get some commitments over the weekend. We might get some because we have multiple scheduled visits happening this weekend. With that being said, how optimistic should we be heading into this weekend and heading into the full second week of the transfer portal? We'll talk about that and so much more right here on Locked On Kansas State. But first, as I've mentioned before, and I'll mention it again because I feel like we just got to do it. We just got to do it. And I highly encourage you to check out Game Time if you are going to be buying tickets anytime soon. The women's basketball game this Saturday, perfect time to check out Game Time. Or if you're making that flight over to Arizona to check out the Rape Bowl on December 26th, what a perfect time to try and save some money. And using Game Time, using the app, checking out Game Time, save a couple dollars because this is the perfect way to do it with Game Time. They have all-in-one pricing. You don't have to worry about being gypped at the checkout. When you pick a $20 ticket, you pick a $50 ticket, and it doesn't wind up being $100 because of tickets and fees and service fees and all that terrible stuff that we hate when you hit that checkout. The pricing is what you get. The toggling features show all the totals up front with no surprise fees at checkout. They also show you a panoramic view of your seat before you buy, so you know where you're going to sit. Make sure you got that nice view of hopefully Kansas State winning the bowl game against Rutgers. They have the lowest price guaranteed, and if Game Time doesn't have that for you, they'll credit you 110% of the difference of your tickets. So you got to love that. There's a no risk really involved in this. So you definitely check out Game Time. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing agency. So do yourself a favor, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, so go ahead and create that account now and redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time, because what time is it? It's game time. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. And we just discussed Jayden Rowe finally committing. We do finally have our first commit for Kansas State for this transfer portal cycle. And we're starting to see where the priorities lie for Kansas State and for the portal. There's still a lot of holes that need to be filled on this team to try and improve from 8-4 from last season, right? I think we're all in agreement with that. When we see the multiple players that are left for the portal, we got a few players that are entering the NFL draft. As of right now, Jacob Parrish is the only one. I would not be surprised to see a name like DJ Giddens, our running back, enter that. But with that being said, it's a process, and it doesn't have to just be ended over these next few weeks. Now, the transfer portal window is only open for a certain amount of days. It does end towards the end of December, but that is only for players to enter their name into the transfer portal. Players can still commit at any time. So that's something just to keep in mind as we are getting down to, slowly entering the end of the phase. We're heading into the second full week of the transfer portal hitting on Monday. So there's still plenty of time for players to enter their names. They feel like they can find a better position, or if a certain player commits in their position group and they feel like they're not going to be able to compete, they might enter. So not always being the first person to pick up commits isn't always a bad thing in this portal. Sitting back and waiting for the right people that can fit and be a perfect fit for this roster is not a bad thing. With that being said, there are multiple visits on the schedule for some transfers heading to Manhattan. As of right now, we have 6 total visits scheduled for this weekend. Six total visits scheduled, 4 of them this weekend. And with that being said, which I love, by the way, we're going to start off with this. 2 of them are cornerbacks. Perfect, right? Just got a cornerback committed. 2 of them are cornerbacks. One of them is an offensive lineman. Got to love that as well. And one of them is a wide receiver. In my list, I named the top 4 position groups I think are the priority. I named cornerback, offensive line, linebacker, and wide receiver. 3 of those 4 are being met on the first weekend when it comes to scheduled visits. I love it. Absolutely love where the priorities are sitting for the coaching staff, the recruiting staff, and so much more. So this is a very good sign. Let's dig into some of these scheduled visits here and see what we can come up with. Let's talk with the cornerbacks first, because I feel like that's where we need to continue to keep our mindset here. Marcavius Moss from West Georgia. The name of the school might not seem like an exciting thing for you, but this kid can play football. Really good. 49 tackles, 5 sacks just last season, 4 touchdowns. PFF grade of just under 80. And when I mean just under 80, 79.9, you got to like that. That's one of those top names that I think is in the portal. He does have multiple other offers as well. I just had it up here. Yeah, he's making a scheduled visit. Actually, he'll be there today, Friday, but he does have other visits scheduled. He's already visited Georgia Tech and Tulane. After he visits Kansas State, he's going to head to UVA, Virginia, and then he's going to go to Houston, and then he's going to go to Minnesota. So overall, he's going to have 6 visits before making his decision, or could also have more visits as well. But as of right now, he has 6 visits. Kansas State is going to be number 3 of the 6 on the list. So we'll see him today on Friday. Interesting to see what happens there. But I'm really excited to see Marcavius Moss, and hopefully he likes Manhattan, because that'd be a great cornerback to have based on what we've seen from him and what his numbers look like and his ratings and how he performed at a level that, according to the data points of PFF, really like his stuff. This is a guy that probably could step into, battling for, maybe the second cornerback spot and seeing a lot of playing time in Kansas State if he would to commit. So got to like that. The second cornerback that is going to be in a visit is Hezekiah Massis from FIU. And we've talked about him before. PFF grade of a 75, coverage grade of 78.4. Overall, he had actually a 62.4 rating at PFF, excuse me. And the defense was 75 and the coverage was 76. So a lot of data points in there when you're looking at PFF. I like Hezekiah Massis as well. He was on I think I said my 3rd priority when we were talking about all those corners on that last episode. But hey, if he's already willing to make his way to Manhattan on the first weekend, then let him move up my board. I have no problem with that. He's scheduled to also be there today, and I think he's going to be there today and Saturday. So hopefully that's a good thing. Hopefully they can show him all around. They can show him exactly what they expect out of him. Again, another guy just like Moss that could potentially battle for that CB1, CB2 spot, and not just a depth piece. And I think that's really important as we talk about where those corners are right now. And maybe we'll be shocked. Maybe we'll be shocked, and some of these freshmen will prove us wrong. And I don't want to say prove us wrong, but just surprise us right off the bat and want to get more playing time other than special teams. Wouldn't that be great? And it's completely possible. I think out of all positions, cornerback or the secondary is like the best spot for that to happen for a freshman. But I don't think you need to bank on that right now in December. I think you really need to do your due diligence, regardless of the roster size of one going down to 105. I think you need to do your due diligence and not be afraid to bring in as many people from the portal as you possibly can. If that number's 10, if that number's higher than 10, so be it. Let that hard decision happen later on when you already have a good idea, a good snapshot of your roster after spring ball, because that 105 doesn't have to happen until the report date for fall camp. So this is the perfect time to build up in the portal. This is the perfect time in the portal to grab as many players as you possibly can if you think they can help your team whatsoever. When the spring portal comes up, it's a shorter portal period anyways. That's when you maybe add 1 player, maybe add 1 or 2 at most, and because you already have an idea of where your 105 is going to sit. So this is the time to make it happen. And you got 2 cornerbacks coming in this weekend. You already have 1 cornerback as a commit. What a perfect time to really just fire on all cylinders and get as many secondary as you can. The offensive lineman coming in, Jack Tanner out of Tulsa. He's coming in this weekend as well, December 13th and 14th. That's according to GoPowerCat.com, 24/7 Sports. Check out their blog and their forum, by the way. Really love the stuff they do over there. But Jack Tanner, I've heard some things that they feel really good about where they sit with him. From from a few message boards that I've looked in. So hopefully that's a really optimistic view. Hopefully we are really happy with that portion, and we'll see if this visit just is the check mark, the icing on the cake, if you will, and hopefully we see a commitment from him. And then with that being said, wide receiver, we did see Trey Spivey enter the transfer portal. It looks like Jace Brown's going to stick around. We haven't heard any more news, and as we've mentioned on this show, no news is good news in the transfer portal. But we still need some wide receiver depth, and I think that we can definitely add that. With that being said, one wide receiver is going to hit the visits this week, and it looks like it's also going to be today, and that's Aziah Johnson, a former wide receiver from Michigan State, and I'm okay with that. You know, we talk about another Big Ten guy that you bring in him for a visit. I've only seen a few things from him, but looking at his stats, 16 catches, 276 yards. With that being said, that's over 17 yards a catch, 2 touchdowns. He did have 1 drop out of those targets, but one is okay. You know, with that being said, he has a 65.5 grade on offense, 66.1 grade on receiving. When according to PFF, numbers look pretty good. They don't look outstanding when you're looking at the data points, but they look pretty good. There are definitely some other names on the list that are better in the data point names with PFF, but as of right now, that's the only one that's scheduled for a visit this weekend. I'm excited to see if any of these players are excited to come to Kansas State, and if they've already been offered, that means that Coach Kleiman and this roster feel like they can be an improvement on this roster. So we have to obviously feel like, you know, this team can do something with them. I'm the more I look about Aziah Johnson, when I see his numbers and I see this, I'm excited about it. Michigan State hasn't had the best couple seasons over the last couple of years, but they've produced wide receivers. I mean, we've seen some really good wide receivers come out of there. So you got to like what the coaching staff has done over there. And then you can bring him in, and hopefully he can be a nice maybe receiver 2, 3. Well, I'm okay with that if he can bring in and do some good things. So we'll see along the lines. But overall, we have 4 scheduled visits coming in, 2 cornerbacks, 1 offensive line, and 1 wide receiver this weekend. How great would it be as we woke up on Monday morning, or maybe we'll have it over the weekend. Maybe we'll have to go live this weekend and talk about some commitments, and you'll get a couple extra bonus episodes here of Locked On Kansas State. But how great would it be if we talked on Monday morning and we had not just 1 commitment with Jayden Rowe that we got yesterday, but we had 7 commitments because all these guys did commit. Now, I'm not holding my breath because obviously there's more visits for a guy like Moss who's going to be on his visits as well, and there's a couple other players that are going to do that as well. However, if I'm hopeful, or if I'm optimistic here, what I'm hopeful is that we get one of those cornerbacks to commit. And then I'm liking that offensive alignment of Tanner. I'd love to see Tanner commit as well. That checks the box off. If we get Tanner to commit, we can push that offensive line priority down a little bit and focus on the cornerbacks and the linebackers in week 2. I think that's where a good spot to sit heading into the second full week of the transfer portal. All right. I got a little bit things to talk about here as we finish up this show. I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about some interesting college football playoff news that just came out on Thursday. And it looks like we're already going to see some changes potentially next season, and why I think that's actually going to be a good thing for Kansas State and the Big 12 Conference. We'll talk about that and so much more as we finish off this Friday episode of Locked On Kansas State. But first, let me talk to you about FanDuel, because FanDuel is the number 1 sports book in America. New customers can bet $5 on a $150 bonus bet if you win. And right now, the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place bets on NFL, on live bets on NFL, all in one place. Talk about NFL, also college football, Army-Navy game coming up. You can do it on college basketball as well with that women's game on Saturday. The odds are not out right now, but I bet later on this evening, you can throw a bet on that. There's some future bets on the men's and women's basketball team, by the way. And I think it's a crazy odd stat if you think that the men's team can win the whole thing or even make it into the Final Four. If I remember correctly, I don't have the tab up, but I think it was a plus 8,500 if you think the men's team can make it to the Final Four. Hey, you never know. And if you ever cue that quote from The Office, someone gives you a 1 in 10,000% or 1 in 10,000 odds, you take that every time. 8,500 is pretty close to that. Regardless, the FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets and more. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more in the exact same place you place your bets. So visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll start with $150 in bonus bets if you win on that first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment count with FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. We're talking about commitments. We're talking portal chatter. We're talking so much more as we finish off this great weekend here of Kansas State football. Regardless of how you feel about how the season ended, the 8-4 finish after a 7-1 start, I think you have to think that this team has a lot of momentum heading into the offseason after the great recruiting class that found out on National Signing Day. You had this commitment on just yesterday, which is like an extension to that National Signing Day piece. And then, moving forward, you're talking about a team that's in the middle of the country that is always, underrated, not looked at as a premier school, but they are one of only 8 teams in the entire country that have had at least 8 wins over the last 4 seasons. This team is always underrated and undershadowed, and they have been for quite some time. And I think that finally, in the next couple seasons, that's all going to change. And with that being said, when we're talking about changes, I think that we're going to see Kansas State in the college football playoffs in the next 3 years. That doesn't shock me at all. Maybe I'll even say 2, because I think Avery Johnson's going to be our quarterback when that happens. And I know that's a hot take, and I'm not afraid to have hot takes on this show. I'm going to be very unapologetic when I make these hot takes and how I feel. And I'll have some Big Ten bias. I'll have some Kansas State bias. There's no doubt about it when we're talking about these kind of subjects. With that being said, there is an interesting report that did come out on Thursday. Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports talked about, will college football format change again after the consolation of power leagues? And he's talking about the SEC and the Big Ten as well. Unfortunately, not talking about the entire Power 4 conference. It's more of a Power 2. It seems like college football is becoming to a tier of 3 when it comes to Power 2. Then you have the entire Power 4 as a whole, and then you have the group of 5. Of course, the Big 12 sits in that Power 4 part. SEC and Big 10 seem to be, because of money and just all the different changes and the realignments over the last couple seasons, have kind of took into a world of their own. Regardless, SEC, we're going to get this real quick, but the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey, looks like he's trying to get some rash changes already happening to the current college football playoff selection, and it might actually happen. There's some talk saying that they were not very happy because they only got a few teams in. When I mean few, they only got 3 SEC teams in, not like the one that only the Big 12 got. But they were not happy, of course, with not getting a team like Alabama in the college football playoffs. However, with that being said, they did confirm that the college football playoffs changes could happen as soon as next year, but all the conferences would have to have a say in that. All 10 FBS conferences would have to have a say. Talking about potentially getting rid of, if you win your conference, that you would not have the automatic bye. I'm okay with that, because if we're looking at it right now, I don't think Boise State should have got the 3rd seed over Arizona State. I'm okay with getting away from some of those buys if you win the conference championship. However, I don't want to make conference championship week a complete dud like it already felt like it was this past season. So there's a couple other implications that they thought about getting rid of and maybe adding. And I think looks like they think the same way as well. Talking about maybe doing some play-in games and some automatic bids for certain conferences. There's some talks about potentially moving the field to 14 teams, giving both the SEC and the Big 10 3 automatic bids, and both the ACC and the Big 12 2 automatic bids. Now, obviously, that's not the best thing in the world for the Big 12, not getting the most amount of automatic bids like the SEC and the Big 10. But here's why I think it's a good thing. First and foremost, let's look at the field right now. How many Big 12 teams is there? Only one, and that's Arizona State. I think BYU is shafted this season, and I think that if you had this type of, this type of format right now, we would see Arizona State and we'd see BYU in there. I think Iowa State would still fall out. But the process of what they think here is that they would have, in the case of like the Big 12's eyes, if you had two teams that automatically made it in, you would give the top team in the regular season the automatic bid, and then 2 and 3 would have a play-in game on the conference championship weekend, and the winner would make it to the playoffs. It'd almost be acting like the first round of the playoffs, and I like that. I really do. But knowing the fact that you're going to have two Big 12 teams in the college football playoffs, I like those odds. Even though it's not the chance of having three like the SEC or the Big 10, I still like those odds just based on what we've seen from this past season, only getting one in from the Big 12. The way that the media viewed the Big 12 this year wasn't fair. But then again, college football's never been fair. It's never been equal. And we've known this for quite some time. So if you get just that kind of automatic bid, if I'm Brett Yormark, even though I'm not the guy getting the most food, the most cereal in my bowl, I'm going to go ahead and be okay with that, getting those two automatic bids moving forward. So how I think that's good for Kansas State, this was an off year for Kansas State. They'll be right back at the very top. They'll be right back in battling for a chance to be in the Big 10 championship, or excuse me, the Big 12 championship, and a potential play-in game if that thing happens. They'll be back for that really soon. And then I also think that, with that being said, hey, just this past season, on the final game of the year, although it was a long shot, they were still in contention for the Big 12 championship on a down season. And when I mean down season, a down second half. If they can have a full season next year, and that all starts with having some great pieces come in the portal. We already got one from Jayden Rowe here. If they have a good season next year, they get back in the contention. If they make a change for maybe 12 to 14 teams, if they get a unanimous decision, move to 14 teams, who's to say Kansas State can't have one of those 14? With that being said, let's do it for Locked On Kansas State. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you back here on Monday here at Locked On Kansas State.